The sound of the doorbell echoed through the quiet mansion, breaking the tense stillness that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Clara stood outside, heart pounding, hands shaking as she adjusted her bag, trying to steady her nerves. The air felt thick, as though the house itself was holding its breath. She knew that today was the beginning of something that would change her life, or break it entirely. She'd been warned. Everyone had heard of the Millers. The infamous power couple, the name Robert Miller echoed in the business world, but it was his wife, Edith, that everyone whispered about in hushed tones. No maid lasts more than a month, they said. Not with Edith around. Clara took a deep breath, the weight of her daughter's medical bills heavy in her chest. The hospital bills were mounting, and Lucas's condition was worsening. She had no choice but to take this job. If she wanted to keep her son alive, she needed this. She needed to survive. The door swung open with a creak, revealing a tall, slender woman with eyes as cold as the marble floors beneath her feet. Edith Miller didn't smile. She didn't greet Clara. Instead, her sharp eyes scanned her up and down, sizing her up like a threat. "You're late," Edith said in a voice that cut through the air like a knife. There was no warmth. No welcome. Just cold command. Clara swallowed, her throat dry, her mind racing. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I got lost." "Save it," Edith interrupted, her tone unforgiving. "This is not a place for excuses. Your job is simple: obey the rules, stay out of my way, and you'll last as long as your work speaks for itself. Fail, and you'll be out before you can pack your things." The words were as sharp as a slap. Clara nodded quickly, fighting to hold back the rush of panic rising in her chest. She couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Edith turned on her heel, not bothering to wait for Clara to follow. "You'll start in the kitchen. There's a list of things to do. I expect nothing less than perfection." Clara moved quickly, keeping her head down, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. Her first task was simple enough, but it was clear this wasn't just about cleaning. This was about proving herself, earning the right to stay here. She couldn't afford to mess up. But Edith's eyes followed her every move, never warm, always watching, always waiting for a mistake. As Clara washed the dishes, her mind raced. 3 months. That's all I need. 3 months. Clara's second day in the Miller household felt like an unspoken war. The mansion had an oppressive silence, broken only by the click of Edith's heels on the marble floors. It was a chilling sound. Each step felt like it echoed through the very core of Clara's being. By 8 a.m., Clara had already prepared breakfast, 2 sets of dishes, one for Robert and one for Edith. Edith's was always more elaborate, always perfect. Robert, on the other hand, barely acknowledged his meal, sipping his coffee in silence. The quiet tension between them was palpable, and Clara couldn't help but notice the cold glances Edith sent her way, as if waiting for her to slip up. "Is this how you intend to serve my husband's breakfast?" Edith's voice cut through the silence, and Clara froze mid-step. Clara turned to face her, heart pounding. Edith was standing by the table, her eyes narrowed as she studied Clara's every move. There was no warmth, no mercy. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll fix it immediately," Clara stammered, her voice barely audible. Edith waved a dismissive hand. "You're lucky I don't have the time to show you how to do things right. Get it together, Clara. Perfection is expected here." Clara nodded quickly, her pulse racing. She had no room for mistakes, not here. If she wanted to keep this job, if she wanted to survive long enough to pay for Lucas's treatments, she had to impress. But no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough for Edith. Every task was scrutinized under the harshest of lights. Every action was a test. And Clara could feel the weight of those tests bearing down on her. By the end of the week, Clara was exhausted. The constant criticism, the relentless expectations, and the feeling that nothing was ever good enough was starting to wear her thin. But she kept her head down and worked through it all. Every day, it was the same: rise early, work tirelessly, endure the cold insults. Yet, she had one thing that kept her going: Lucas. It was during a routine task in the living room that Clara made her first significant mistake. The glass vase, which she had polished earlier that day, tipped over as she was dusting. It crashed to the floor, the sound sharp and unforgiving. "Are you serious?" Edith's voice rang out, loud and sharp. "That was a priceless antique. Do you have any idea what this means?" Clara scrambled to pick up the broken pieces, her heart racing. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It won't happen again." Edith's eyes burned with fury as she approached Clara, standing tall, towering over her. "You think sorry is going to fix this? You're a liability, Clara. I don't have time to babysit someone who can't even handle a simple task." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes, but she held them back. She couldn't let Edith see her break. Not now. Not when everything she had was on the line. "I'll clean it up, ma'am," Clara whispered, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. As Clara worked to clean up the broken vase, she couldn't shake the feeling of utter defeat. For a moment, she wondered if this was all too much. If she was in over her head. But the thought of Lucas and the crushing weight of his medical bills pushed her forward. She couldn't afford to break. Not yet. Days blurred together as Clara continued to work under the harsh scrutiny of Edith. Each day was the same: endless tasks, endless criticism. But she kept her focus. She had no other choice. She needed the money. And she needed to survive this. It wasn't until Clara was tasked with organizing Edith's personal files that she discovered something that would change everything. Buried beneath stacks of paperwork, Clara found an old letter, one addressed to Edith, from a hospital. The letter was dated just a few weeks ago. Clara's breath caught as she skimmed the contents. The letter was about Lucas's condition. Clara's stomach turned as she realized that Edith had known all along. She knew about Lucas's health struggles, about how Clara had been struggling to pay for his treatments. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Edith had known. And yet, she still treated Clara like she was disposable. Like her struggles meant nothing. Clara's hands shook as she put the letter back in its place. The weight of this new truth pressed down on her. But she couldn't confront Edith, not yet. She had to keep her composure. She had to play the part, survive this. The next day, Clara faced Edith with a new sense of determination. She had learned that Edith wasn't the powerful, untouchable woman she had initially thought. She had weaknesses too, hidden deep beneath the icy exterior. Clara worked with precision, making sure every task was flawless, every meal perfectly prepared. She could feel Edith's eyes on her, waiting for her to slip up. But Clara didn't falter. Then, just as Edith was about to leave for a meeting, she stopped in the hallway and turned to Clara. Her eyes softened, just for a moment, but it was enough to make Clara pause. "Clara," Edith said, her voice quieter than usual. "Why don't you take a break today? Go get some fresh air. You've been working non-stop." Clara was taken aback. This was the first time Edith had shown any semblance of kindness. She wasn't sure what to say. "I'm fine, ma'am. I can keep working." Edith shook her head. "No. Go. Take some time for yourself." Clara nodded, confused but grateful. She had no idea why Edith had suddenly softened, but it was a moment she didn't take for granted. Perhaps, just perhaps, Edith was starting to see her differently. That evening, as Clara prepared dinner for the Millers, she could feel a subtle shift in the air. Edith was still sharp, still demanding, but there was something different in her approach, more understanding, more careful. It was as if Edith was testing the waters, unsure of what to make of Clara's quiet strength. "Clara," Edith called from the dining room, "come here." Clara stood up, wiping her hands on her apron as she entered the room. Edith was sitting at the table, her eyes fixed on the papers before her. "I've been thinking," Edith started, her voice unusually soft. "You've been here for a while now. And despite all the setbacks, you've kept going. I don't know many people who would last under this kind of pressure. You're tougher than I gave you credit for." Clara's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time Edith had ever acknowledged her hard work without criticism. It was a breakthrough, and Clara could feel the weight of it. "Thank you, ma'am," Clara said, her voice steady. "I'm just doing my best." Edith nodded, her gaze shifting. "You're not like the others. You've earned my respect." Clara didn't know how to respond. Respect? Was this the beginning of something new? A sign of change? Or was it just a momentary shift in Edith's icy demeanor? The next few days were strange. Edith had softened, but Clara could feel the tension still hanging in the air. It wasn't like before, there were no outbursts or harsh words, but there was a subtle shift in the way Edith looked at her. Every task, every word, felt weighed down by something unsaid. Clara wasn't sure if it was progress or if she was just imagining things. Clara had just finished cleaning the living room when Edith appeared, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't scowling either. Clara turned to face her, trying to remain neutral. "You've been here for a few weeks now," Edith began, her tone controlled but distant. "I've been watching you. You're not like the others. I have to admit, you're holding up better than I thought." Clara nodded, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am. That's all." "Doing your job," Edith repeated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Tell me something, Clara. Why don't you ever ask for help? Why do you never complain?" Clara felt her pulse quicken. The truth felt too dangerous to speak. She couldn't tell Edith about the mountain of medical bills, about her son's worsening health. If Edith found out how desperate she truly was, she might exploit it, use it against her. "I have my reasons," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "I don't want to burden anyone." Edith didn't respond right away, just studied her with a penetrating gaze. For a moment, Clara thought the conversation might end in more criticism, but instead, Edith sighed, almost imperceptibly. "You're too proud," Edith muttered, more to herself than Clara. "That's your problem." Clara held her breath. She didn't respond, just waited for Edith to continue, unsure of where this was going. "You know," Edith said, almost wistfully, "it's funny. I see so much of myself in you. The pride, the drive to prove yourself. It's the same thing I did when I first came here. I had to fight for everything." Edith's voice faltered slightly, a rare crack in her usual cold demeanor. "But I didn't do it alone. I had to learn that eventually. Maybe you should, too." Clara's heart raced. She didn't know how to process what Edith had just said. Was this empathy, or was Edith simply trying to manipulate her? She couldn't be sure, but she knew one thing, she wasn't about to let her guard down now. "I'll be fine," Clara said softly. "I don't need help." But deep down, she wasn't sure anymore. The pressure was mounting, and she couldn't help but wonder if there was something more she wasn't seeing. A week later, Clara's worst fear came true. Edith, seemingly tired of waiting for Clara to confide in her, dug deeper. It was another quiet afternoon when Clara found herself in the hallway, organizing laundry when Edith approached her with a clipboard in hand. "You've been dodging my questions," Edith said, her voice laced with something hard to place. Was it concern? Or was it frustration? Clara froze. She'd known this day would come, but she still wasn't prepared for it. She kept her back turned, hands trembling slightly as she folded a towel. "What do you mean?" "Don't play coy with me," Edith snapped, taking a step closer. "You think I don't know what's going on?" "Your son, Clara. I know about the hospital bills. I know about everything." Clara's heart stopped. She felt the world tilt for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. How had Edith found out? Edith didn't wait for an answer. I'm not blind. I see the way you work, how you carry yourself. You're hiding something, and I'm not going to let it ruin your chances here. Clara turned slowly, her face a mask of calm despite the storm inside. You've been watching me. You know everything. Edith's expression softened for a moment, just a fraction. I know enough. And I won't let you throw everything away because of pride. If you need help, you can ask. I'll help you, Clara. But only if you're honest with me. Clara's mind spun, torn between her overwhelming need for help and the walls she'd built around herself. She didn't want to owe Edith anything, not after everything she'd been through. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about Lucas, about saving her son. I'm not asking for charity, Clara said firmly, looking Edith in the eye. I'm asking for a chance to do what I need to do. Edith's gaze remained steady. A chance? Clara, you're already in over your head. Let me help you. Let me help your son. Clara hesitated, but the weight of the situation broke through her resolve. She couldn't do this alone. Not anymore. With a deep breath, she nodded. I'll take the help, she said quietly. But only if you promise me this. No strings attached. No favors. Just help. For Lucas. Edith's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Deal. The next day, things began to change. Clara wasn't sure what to expect, but Edith kept her word. She made a few phone calls, arranged for financial assistance for Lucas's medical bills, and even managed to pull some strings at the hospital. Clara was stunned. She wasn't used to this side of Edith, the side that offered genuine help without strings attached. But as the days passed, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't quite right. Edith was giving her assistance, but there was something about the way she watched Clara closely, as if she were waiting for something to happen. Clara couldn't help but wonder, was Edith helping her out of the goodness of her heart, or was this part of some deeper game? But for now, Clara didn't have the luxury of questioning motives. She had Lucas to think about. And if Edith's help meant saving her son, she'd take it, no matter the cost. As the weeks went on, Clara continued working tirelessly, still under the watchful eye of Edith. The kindness from Edith, though unexpected, never quite erased the underlying tension that lingered in the house. It felt as though Clara was walking a tightrope, too much trust, and she might fall. Not enough, and she might never get the help she so desperately needed. One evening, while she was cleaning the kitchen, Clara overheard Edith speaking on the phone, her voice low but sharp. I'm doing this for her, but she doesn't know what she's getting into, Edith said. She has no idea what it costs to be in my world. She thinks she's in control, but she's not. Clara's heart skipped a beat. What was Edith talking about? Was this just a test, or was something else at play? Clara knew she had to be careful. She had accepted Edith's help, but she hadn't let her guard down. Not yet. She couldn't afford to. Clara had been working for weeks, and though the tension between her and Edith was still palpable, something had shifted. The help was real, there were no strings attached in the way Edith had promised. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the peace was fragile, hanging by a thread. One evening, as Clara sat quietly on her break, a phone call shattered the silence. It was from the hospital. Clara's heart dropped as she answered. Ms. Clara, we have an update on Lucas. We need to discuss his treatment plan. Clara's hands trembled as she listened. The news wasn't good. The hospital had exhausted all possible treatments within their current plan. They had recommended a specialist, one of the top doctors in the country, but the costs were astronomical. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she hung up. The weight of everything she had been working for, every sacrifice, felt like it might come crashing down. She had been holding on to the fragile hope that the bills could be covered, but now, it seemed impossible. As Clara sat in the silence of the kitchen, the familiar click of Edith's heels approached. Clara wiped her eyes quickly, but Edith had already seen. She had been watching, as she always did. "Clara," Edith's voice was softer than usual. "You're still dealing with this, aren't you?" Clara didn't look up. She couldn't. The weight of it was too much. But Edith wasn't going to let her off that easily. "Why didn't you tell me about Lucas's condition sooner?" Edith's voice was cold, but there was a hint of something else, something softer. "If you'd been more honest with me, maybe we could have done more." Clara stood up abruptly, not wanting to meet Edith's gaze. "I didn't ask for your help, Edith," she said through clenched teeth. "I didn't want to owe anyone anything. Especially not you." Edith's gaze hardened, but there was an edge of understanding behind her eyes. "I get it. But we're past that now, Clara. You've done everything you can. It's my turn now." Clara felt a knot form in her stomach. "You're going to help me again? More money?" Edith shook her head, her expression unreadable. "This time, it's not about money. This time, it's about something else." Clara couldn't make sense of it. Something else? What did Edith mean? But before she could ask, Edith stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I know someone. A doctor, one of the best in the country. He could help Lucas. And I'm going to make it happen." Edith's words hung in the air like a lifeline Clara desperately needed but was too afraid to grasp. "Why are you doing this?" Clara asked, barely above a whisper. Edith's lips curled into a small smile. "Because, Clara, sometimes you have to let go of your pride to do what's best for the people you care about." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. Was this the breakthrough she'd been waiting for? Or was this another manipulation, another test? But as she looked at Edith, really looked at her, she saw something different. Something genuine. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." Edith nodded, her face softening for the first time in weeks. "Say nothing. Just let me do this for you. Let me do it for Lucas." It wasn't easy. Clara had spent her whole life relying on no one but herself. She'd kept her secrets, shielded her pain, because asking for help felt like a weakness. But with Edith's unexpected offer to help Lucas, Clara had no choice but to accept. She had to trust that this wasn't just another empty promise. The following days were a blur of appointments, forms, and meetings with doctors, each one more draining than the last. But with Edith's connections, doors that had once seemed impossible to open were now swinging wide. The best specialists in the country were now considering Lucas's case. It felt surreal. A part of Clara kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but each time she thought the worst, Edith was right there, always providing, always steady. One evening, after yet another long day of back and forth with doctors, Clara found herself standing in the kitchen, exhausted. She hadn't even realized Edith had come in until she spoke. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders, Clara," Edith said, her voice quiet but heavy. Clara let out a deep sigh. "I'm not sure how much longer I can do this. It feels like I'm running out of time." Edith stood beside her, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder, surprisingly gentle. "You're not alone in this, Clara. Don't forget that." Clara turned to face her, searching Edith's eyes for any hint of deceit. There was nothing there, only a quiet sincerity. "But why are you helping me?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "After everything, all the ways I've been treated. Why would you suddenly care?" Edith paused, her eyes softening. "Because, Clara, I know what it's like to feel invisible. To fight for your place in the world. I've seen too many people push others down to get ahead. But sometimes, when you stop to look, you realize you've been standing next to someone who's been fighting their own battle the whole time. You've been doing it silently, and I respect that more than anything." The words hit Clara like a wave. She had spent years fighting, alone, in silence. But in that moment, standing beside Edith, she felt the smallest flicker of hope. Maybe there was more to Edith than she had originally thought. Maybe there was something human beneath the surface. Clara nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can ever repay you for this." "You don't have to," Edith said softly. "Just promise me one thing, let me help you. Let me help Lucas." Clara hesitated but then nodded, feeling the weight of the promise settle between them. "I promise," Clara whispered, her heart full. Weeks passed, and Lucas's condition slowly began to improve. The new doctor Edith had found worked wonders, and Clara couldn't believe the progress her son was making. Each step forward felt like a small miracle. Yet, something was still hanging over Clara. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Edith's involvement in this than she could understand. And that's when it happened. One evening, as Clara was about to leave for the hospital to visit Lucas, Edith cornered her in the hallway. "There's one last thing, Clara," Edith said, her voice grave. "I need you to do something for me. A favor." Clara turned, surprised. "A favor?" Edith's eyes darkened slightly, but her tone remained calm. "I need you to stay here. With us. You can't leave. Not now." Clara's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you've done more for me than I could ever repay. But now, it's time for you to give something back," Edith continued. "You stay with us, permanently. And you'll never have to worry about money, about Lucas's treatment, about anything. But you can't leave. Not now. Not when we've come this far." Clara's heart raced. This wasn't just about Lucas anymore. It was about her life, her freedom. And Edith knew it. Clara's mind raced. Could she trust Edith? Could she stay in this house, under her roof, knowing the price would be her autonomy? But the alternative was worse. Without Edith, where would she and Lucas be? "I'll think about it," Clara said quietly, her voice low. Edith smiled, the faintest flicker of triumph in her eyes. "That's all I can ask." Clara sat alone in her room, the weight of Edith's words hanging over her. She had been fighting for her son's survival, for her independence, for everything she believed in. But now, Edith's offer felt like a crossroads, a choice between two lives, two paths. In the quiet of her room, Clara made her decision. She had always fought for herself and her son, but perhaps, just perhaps, this was the opportunity she needed. Maybe this was the moment that could change everything. With a heavy heart, Clara stood and walked towards Edith's office. It was time to make her choice. Clara had never been one to accept charity. The thought of being beholden to anyone, especially Edith, was a struggle. But as she sat in the quiet of her room, contemplating Edith's offer, she realized that her choices were limited. The promise of her son's future, a future that had been in peril just weeks ago, was now within reach. Lucas was improving, but only because of the help Edith had provided. And yet, a part of Clara still resisted. What would it mean for her life? What would it mean for her autonomy, for the person she had fought to become? Could she truly accept the hand Edith was offering, knowing the cost of her independence? Clara stood up, the decision weighing heavily on her chest. She walked to the door, took one last look at the life she'd built within these walls, and made her way to Edith's office. As she entered, Edith looked up from the desk, her expression unreadable. "I've made my decision," Clara said, her voice firm. "I'll stay. For Lucas." Edith's face softened, though only slightly. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes steady. "I knew you would come to that conclusion, Clara. You don't have a choice, do you?" Clara's eyes flashed with frustration, but she held her tongue. "What exactly are you asking of me, Edith?" Edith's smile was cool, calculated. "Stay here. Live with us. You'll have everything you need. Lucas will be treated without worry. But, Clara, you can't leave. Not now, not ever. You owe me that. Clara swallowed hard. The weight of the word settled like a stone in her stomach. I owe you. Edith's gaze didn't waver. In a way, yes. I've helped you, Clara. You've done everything to survive on your own, but now, it's time to accept that you can't do it alone anymore. Not for him. She motioned to the door, a silent invitation to walk out of this room and into a life that Clara was no longer in control of. The quiet tension between them hung in the air, but Clara knew the decision she'd made couldn't be undone. She had already committed, for Lucas's sake. She just didn't know how far this would go. Life in the Miller household had shifted. Clara had agreed to stay. She was no longer a temporary employee, a maid moving from house to house. She was a permanent fixture in the Miller family now, at least, that's what Edith had implied. It wasn't easy for Clara to accept, but the transformation she'd witnessed in her son, his recovery, was undeniable. And so, for now, she stayed. In the beginning, the tension was still thick. Edith didn't speak much, but the air between them was different now. The silent understanding that Clara was no longer a visitor but an integral part of the family was unsettling. Clara couldn't help but wonder whether this arrangement was truly as altruistic as it seemed. Edith's demands were no less than before, perfection was expected in every detail, in every meal, in every task. But now, Clara no longer had to fear for her job. She had security, something she hadn't had in years. But with that security came a quiet, ever-present tension. Clara could feel Edith's watchful eyes on her, always observing, always calculating. Sometimes, it felt like Clara was living in a gilded cage, protected, yes, but not free. And then came the day Clara discovered something that shook her more than any of Edith's demands ever had. It was a Saturday afternoon when Clara stumbled upon a series of documents, official records, reports, hidden in Edith's study. Curiosity got the better of her. She began flipping through the papers, until one page caught her attention. It was a report from a private investigator, detailing personal information about Clara and Lucas. The report wasn't a general background check, it was detailed, meticulous. It contained information about Clara's past, her financial struggles, and even the hospital bills she'd been desperately trying to pay off. Clara's stomach churned. How had Edith gotten this information? Why had she kept it? She tried to shake off the dread creeping over her. This wasn't just kindness, this was manipulation. She quickly put the papers back, but the damage was done. Clara's heart raced as she realized that Edith had known everything about her for far longer than she had let on. The discovery was impossible to forget. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that every move she made was being carefully tracked. It was one thing to accept help, but it was another to realize that the person offering that help had been monitoring her every step, knowing her every weakness. Clara waited until the house had quieted down for the night, then she made her way to Edith's study. She couldn't keep this to herself any longer. She needed to know why. Why had Edith gone to such lengths to gather information on her? Edith was sitting by the fireplace when Clara entered, her expression unreadable. She didn't look surprised, but she didn't stop Clara from approaching. Clara, Edith said softly, her voice calm. I knew this day would come. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Why, Edith? Why did you do this? Why did you dig into my life like that? Edith set the book she was reading aside, her eyes meeting Clara's without flinching. Because I needed to understand you. I needed to know what made you tick, what drove you. You're not the first person I've helped, Clara. You won't be the last. But you're different. Clara's anger flared. I'm different. You don't get to control my life just because you think you're helping me. You think this is some kind of game? Edith's lips curled into a small, calculating smile. No, Clara. It's not a game. But you and I both know that this arrangement isn't just about Lucas. It's about survival. And sometimes, survival requires more than just help. It requires control. Clara stood frozen, unable to find the words. She had trusted Edith, had let her guard down for the sake of her son. But now, she realized the truth: there was no kindness without strings attached. Edith wasn't doing this out of generosity. She was doing it because she had something to gain. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat in her room, turning over Edith's words in her mind. Survival requires control. She had never realized how true that was until now. Edith had her own reasons for helping Clara, and they didn't align with Clara's own need for freedom and autonomy. The next day, when Clara went downstairs, Edith was already there, waiting. She didn't say anything at first, but Clara could feel the weight of her presence. "You've learned something about me," Edith said, her voice smooth, almost too calm. "And now that you know, I expect you to make a decision." Clara turned slowly, meeting Edith's gaze. "What decision?" "Whether or not you're willing to accept the terms of this arrangement." "You can leave, Clara. Walk away, take Lucas, and face whatever comes next. Or you can stay. But if you stay, you're here on my terms. Everything you've been given, everything I've provided, comes with a price." Clara felt the walls close in on her. "What do you want from me, Edith?" Edith's smile was cold, calculating. "I want you to stay loyal. I want you to never forget who gave you this second chance. And I want you to trust that I'll be there for you when you need me." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She had come so far, but now, it felt like she was standing at a precipice. "I'll stay," Clara said, her voice firm. "For Lucas. But don't mistake my decision for loyalty. I'm doing this because I have no other choice." Edith nodded, her expression unreadable. "We'll see about that, Clara." Clara's life in the Miller household had taken a strange turn. The security she had once seen as a blessing now felt like a cage. She no longer had to worry about the bills or Lucas's treatment, and yet, something was gnawing at her, an unease she couldn't shake. Edith's expectations had been clear from the start: Clara owed her for everything, and in return, she was expected to follow Edith's unspoken rules. But the price of that security wasn't just about staying in the house, it was about surrendering control over her own life. It was about being tied to Edith in ways Clara hadn't fully understood when she made her decision to stay. Days passed in a haze. Edith continued to be a presence in Clara's life, but there was still that unspoken tension between them. Clara did her work with precision, keeping her head down, never forgetting the reason she was there. But the sense of powerlessness was beginning to settle in, like an invisible chain around her wrist, pulling tighter with each passing day. One evening, Clara found herself standing in the garden, watching the sun set behind the tall mansion walls. She could hear the faint sound of music playing from the house, a reminder of the life that was slowly becoming her own. But the air felt heavy, and Clara's thoughts kept drifting to her son. How much longer could she keep this up? How long before Edith's expectations would push her too far? "Clara?" Clara turned at the sound of Edith's voice. She had approached silently, as she always did. There was something almost predatory about the way Edith moved, like a lion stalking its prey. "I didn't hear you coming," Clara said, her voice tight. "What is it, Edith?" Edith smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "I was just wondering if you're happy here, Clara. I've given you everything you need. Lucas is doing better, you've got a roof over your head. You don't have to worry about anything." Clara hesitated. "I appreciate everything you've done, Edith. I really do. But sometimes, it feels like there's something more you expect from me. Something I'm not seeing." Edith's smile remained unchanged, but her eyes darkened. "I expect nothing more than what we agreed upon. But don't forget, there's always a price. Everyone has to pay it, sooner or later." Clara swallowed, feeling the weight of Edith's words press down on her chest. She had accepted the help, but at what cost? Weeks passed, and Clara's unease grew. She had tried to ignore the little things, the subtle manipulations, the veiled threats, the constant reminder that she owed Edith for everything. But the cracks were starting to show. Edith's control over her life was suffocating, and Clara couldn't ignore it any longer. It started with small things. Edith's increasing demands for Clara to stay within the house, to attend her social events, to be seen as part of the family. At first, Clara had gone along with it, knowing that it was just a way to keep up appearances. But now, the expectations were becoming harder to ignore. One evening, after an extravagant dinner with Edith's friends, Clara found herself standing alone in the hallway. She had cleaned up after the event, as usual, but tonight felt different. The air was thick with something unsaid, and Clara felt it pressing in on her from all sides. She was about to retreat to her room when Edith appeared from the shadows. Her eyes were cold, calculating. "Clara," she said softly. "Do you know what you've become?" Clara stiffened. "I'm not sure what you mean." "You've become indispensable," Edith said, her voice low, almost too calm. "You're no longer just a maid. You've become part of the family, whether you like it or not. And that comes with certain obligations." Clara's heart raced. Obligations? Edith stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You don't get to leave now, Clara. Not after everything I've done for you. I've made sure Lucas has the best care, I've provided everything you've needed. You think you can just walk away from that?" Clara's throat tightened. "I never asked for any of this, Edith." "And yet, here you are," Edith said, her smile colder than ever. "You can leave whenever you want, but you'll never be free. You'll never escape this. Not from me." Clara was about to respond, but Edith turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Clara stood frozen in the hallway, the weight of her words settling over her. She had made a deal with the devil, and now she was trapped. The days that followed were suffocating. Clara's every move was scrutinized. Edith's presence loomed over her like a shadow, and no matter what she did, it was never enough. Clara felt like she was losing herself, losing her sense of control. She had agreed to stay for Lucas, but at what cost? How much longer could she endure Edith's manipulations without snapping? It was during a routine task in the garden that Clara finally reached her breaking point. She had been pruning the roses, a task Edith had insisted on, when she felt a sharp pain in her wrist. It was the strain of weeks of physical and emotional pressure, years of it, really, and it finally caught up to her. She dropped the pruning shears and clutched her wrist, trying to steady herself. "Clara?" Clara looked up to see Edith standing at the edge of the garden, her face unreadable. There was something in her eyes, something that Clara couldn't quite place. "I'm fine," Clara said quickly, forcing herself to stand. She didn't want Edith to see weakness. "Are you?" Edith asked, stepping closer. "You've been looking worn out lately. You don't have to carry the weight of everything on your own, you know." Clara didn't answer. She didn't trust Edith's sudden concern. It was always a trap. "Take a break, Clara," Edith continued. "You've been working so hard. I've given you everything you need, haven't I?" Clara's heart thudded in her chest. The truth was, Edith had given her everything. But what did that mean for her? What did it mean for Lucas? "I just need to finish this," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Edith tilted her head, her expression hardening. "You think you can walk away from this, from me? You think you can just quit when things get tough?" Clara's stomach twisted. "I never said I wanted to quit. I just need to breathe." Edith's eyes narrowed. "You'll never breathe again unless I let you. Not after everything I've done for you. You owe me everything." Clara's pulse raced. She had been holding on by a thread for so long. And now, she realized the truth, there was no way out. Edith owned her. She owned her son's future, her livelihood. And there was no escaping the web she had spun. Clara spent the following days in a daze. She had no idea how to move forward. Edith's control had become a prison, one that she could no longer ignore. It was suffocating, and yet, Clara couldn't bring herself to leave. Not now, not when everything was finally falling into place for Lucas. But it was getting harder and harder to live with the constant reminders of her captivity. The subtle manipulations. The expectations. The fact that she was no longer allowed to make her own choices. One evening, after another tense dinner with Edith's guests, Clara sat alone in the library, lost in thought. She hadn't realized how much time had passed until she heard Edith's voice. "Clara," she said softly, "it's time." Clara looked up to find Edith standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "It's time to make a decision," Edith continued. "Are you going to keep pretending that you have control over your life? Or are you going to accept what I've given you and stop fighting it?" Clara's heart beat loudly in her chest. She knew what Edith was asking. It wasn't just about staying or leaving. It was about surrendering, about accepting the reality of her situation. "I'll stay," Clara said, her voice quiet but resolute. "For Lucas. But you need to understand, I'm not yours. Not completely." Edith's lips curled into a smile. "We'll see about that, Clara." As Clara sat there, the weight of her decision pressing down on her, she realized that this was the point of no return. She had made her choice. And now, there was no going back. Clara woke up the next morning to the sound of birds outside the window, the light streaming through the curtains casting long shadows across her room. The house was still quiet, as if it were holding its breath. The weight of the decision she had made the night before still pressed heavily on her chest. She had chosen to stay, to endure, for Lucas's sake. But the cost of that decision, the cost of remaining under Edith's control, felt like a chainsaw carving away at her freedom. Yet, what choice did she have? Could she really walk away and risk losing everything, including Lucas's future? As Clara stepped into the kitchen, Edith was already there, sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee in hand, her eyes not leaving Clara for a moment. It was as if she were waiting for something, waiting for Clara to break, to question her decision. "Good morning," Edith said smoothly, her voice almost too calm. "I see you've made your choice." Clara nodded but didn't speak at first. She wasn't sure what to say. The room felt thick with tension, every movement deliberate, calculated. Edith wasn't just asking her to stay anymore, she was testing her. Pushing her. Making sure Clara understood the full implications of her decision. "I'm doing this for Lucas," Clara finally said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "But don't mistake that for loyalty to you." Edith raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing her face. "Oh, Clara, you think you have control? You're in my house now. You've made your choice, and that comes with certain expectations." Clara swallowed hard. "I know what I've agreed to. And you'll follow through, won't you?" Edith leaned forward, locking eyes with Clara. "I've given you everything you've asked for. But I expect you to stay loyal, to respect the terms. Don't forget who put you here." Clara's pulse raced. She wasn't sure how much longer she could stand this constant, quiet pressure. Edith had given her what she needed, yes. But now that her future was tied to Edith's conditions, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a trap. "I'm not your pawn, Edith," Clara said, her voice trembling despite herself. "I'm here because of my son. Don't forget that." "I haven't forgotten," Edith replied coldly. "But don't forget, there's always a price for survival." As the weeks passed, Clara's life seemed to shift under the weight of Edith's presence. She had become a permanent part of the household, yes, but her sense of self was slipping away. Every decision she made was watched, scrutinized, and, in some cases, manipulated. She found herself living under Edith's shadow, unable to shake the feeling that her every move was controlled. But Lucas's recovery kept her going. With every passing day, he grew stronger, his laughter returning, his cheeks rosy once again. The doctors were amazed by his progress. And it was all thanks to Edith. Clara couldn't deny that. But the more Lucas thrived, the more Clara's resentment toward Edith festered. It wasn't until one afternoon, when Clara went to check on Lucas, that she discovered the true cost of her decision. She opened the door to Lucas's room, finding him sitting on the floor, his toys scattered around him, but he looked up at her with a worried expression. "Mom, I found this," he said, holding out a letter. Clara took the letter from his hand, her stomach twisting as she recognized Edith's handwriting. It wasn't just a letter, it was a set of legal documents. She scanned the words quickly, her heart sinking as she read. The documents were contracts, binding contracts, detailing her continued employment, her living arrangement in the Miller household, and her obligation to remain loyal to Edith's family indefinitely. A sinking feeling washed over Clara. This was it. She had unknowingly signed herself into a lifetime of servitude under Edith's watchful eye. Lucas's recovery wasn't the only thing that had been helped. Her life, her freedom, her autonomy, had all been signed away without her realizing. Clara stood frozen in the doorway of Lucas's room, the documents clutched tightly in her hand. She had been manipulated, tricked, and now the full weight of it was crashing down on her. She needed answers. She needed to confront Edith. Clara stormed down the hallway, the paper in her hands shaking with anger. She reached Edith's office, her breath coming in ragged bursts, and without knocking, she burst through the door. Edith looked up from her desk, not surprised in the least. She had been expecting this, Clara realized. The air in the room was thick with the tension of unsaid words. "What is this?" Clara demanded, holding up the documents. Edith's eyes flickered briefly, but she remained composed. "You've seen it. You know what it is." "You've tricked me," Clara said, her voice low but trembling with fury. "You've kept me here, under false pretenses. I didn't agree to this. I never signed up for." "You signed your life away the moment you accepted my help," Edith interrupted, her voice steady and calm. "You think you had a choice? You think you could survive on your own without me? You'd still be living in the gutter, begging for scraps, if not for me." Clara's heart ached. The words cut deep, but something inside her snapped. "You think I owe you everything because you helped Lucas? You think that makes me your property?" Edith stood up, her face now inches from Clara's. "Yes. I do. And you should be grateful. Because without me, where would you be? Without me, Lucas would still be sick, and you'd have nothing." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "I won't let you control me any longer." Edith's eyes flashed with cold amusement. "You think you can escape? You think you can walk away from everything I've given you? You're tied to me now, Clara. There's no getting out. Not without losing everything. Not without losing him." The words hit Clara like a punch in the gut. She had known this was coming, the price of her choices. But the realization that she was now trapped, with no way out, crushed her. The weeks that followed felt like an endless spiral of dread. Clara had nowhere to go, no way to escape. Edith's grip on her life had become a vice, tightening with every passing day. But the pain of watching her son flourish, of seeing him grow healthy and strong, kept Clara from breaking completely. She would endure, for Lucas. That was the only thing that kept her going. But deep inside, a fire was burning. Clara would not remain a prisoner forever. One night, as she sat alone in her room, a thought crept into her mind, a dangerous thought, but a necessary one. She could leave. She could take Lucas and walk away, live without Edith's suffocating control. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But it was possible. The next morning, Clara gathered what little she could, preparing herself for the hardest decision she had ever made. She couldn't stay. Not like this. Not at the cost of her soul. Clara approached Edith's office, a final confrontation looming. This was it. She could either continue to be Edith's pawn, or she could break free. The confrontation with Edith was inevitable. Clara walked into the room, holding her head high, ready to speak her truth. "I'm leaving," she said firmly. Edith's face hardened. "You think you can walk away from this?" Clara nodded, her resolve unshakable. "I've given you everything I could. But no more. I won't live like this anymore." Edith took a step forward, her voice low. "You'll regret this, Clara. You'll never find anything better than what I've given you." "I don't need better," Clara replied, her voice steady. "I need my freedom." And with that, Clara turned and walked out the door, leaving Edith and the life she had once known behind. Clara stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air like it was her first breath in years. She had left the mansion, left Edith's hold on her life, and for the first time in a long time, Clara felt the weight of her decisions lift from her shoulders. Lucas, now fully recovered, was waiting for her. Together, they would begin again. Clara didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was free. And that, in itself, was worth everything. The journey Clara had taken was one of struggle, manipulation, and eventual triumph. While she had accepted help, the price was too high, and she ultimately broke free from the chains that had held her. In the end, Clara's decision to choose her freedom was the ultimate victory, proving that no matter the obstacles, the strength to break free is always within reach.